This meeting is being recorded.
Good morning again, everybody. And this is our 11th session of Wandering Through the Big Book. And I got to read our 5th reading, which winds up, for me anyway, being the answer to everything. It doesn't matter what the problem is or what the situation is. If I will humbly rely on God and I will behave the way I think God wants me to behave, I will experience serenity right in the midst of whatever's going on. It's just always the answer. It's like, what, there are people that have t-shirts that it says something, maybe it's a front and a back, and it says, I don't know which way it goes, but God is the answer. And then underneath it, it says, what is your problem? And it's like, that's the answer to everything. And this morning we're reading more about alcoholism. And what we're going to find is that Bill is saying essentially, no matter what you think is going on, lack of power is your problem. You don't have the power to experience your life the way you would like to. You don't have the power to experience your life with serenity as opposed to the agony around the calamity. And you're not going to get that power through self-knowledge. One of the themes that keeps showing up is that self-knowledge won't cut it. In at least the last story, self-knowledge won't cut it. You've got to get power. You've got to get spiritual power. So the question becomes, how do I establish the conditions under which I can access spiritual power? And then how do I go about it? And that's where we come to the whole idea of prayer. And for me, the importance of Silkworth saying, I earnestly advise every one of you to read this book through. And though perhaps you came to scoff, you will remain to pray. So let's see. So we're going to read through this chapter. It's got a bunch of information, and then eventually these 4 stories. The first one's a man of 30. Second one is a car salesman named Jim. Third one is the jaywalker. It's not really a story, but it's an analogy. And the fourth is this guy, Fred, and we'll see how far we get. So I'm basically looking at the book starting on page 30, and they're going to do some stuff about the setup of our problem, because the first thing that they're going to talk about is how most of us want to be normal. We just don't like this idea that we're different than other people. And that's what makes it so hard to admit that we are powerless over alcohol and that we can't manage our own lives. So they start off with what most of us have been unwilling to admit we were real alcoholics. Now, right away, you can make this distinction that showed up in There Is a Solution between the average, normal, temperate drinker who can take it or leave it. It's one of those questions you could ask a newcomer. Well, can you take it or leave it? And most of us are going to admit right away, no, I can't take it or leave it. I can't. Alcohol is not one of those things that I can just take or leave. Then we have what the book calls the hard drinker. And I believe that the hard drinker has the allergy. So if they start, they're going to wind up in trouble in terms of their drinking. They're going to drink more than they want to drink. But the difference between the hard drinker and the real alcoholic is the hard drinker is strong enough mentally that if you give the hard drinker a good enough reason, a work reason, a relationship reason, a health reason, any kind of reason, they can stay away. They can use the power of their mind to stay away from the first drink. And the very first story is going to be about that. This guy stays away from alcohol for 25 years or something, and while he pursues his career. And then, well, you'll see, then he goes out. So at any rate, this first paragraph, unwilling to admit that we were real alcoholics. We don't like to think that we're different. It's not surprising that our drinking careers have been characterized by countless vain attempts to prove we could drink like other people, to prove that we could take it or leave it. And the real problem is, the real problem, I think, is my need for relief. Although I want to say that today I can get that relief. I can get relief from the calamity by being willing to humbly rely on God. If that's the solution, and you get into those different words, part of it is the humble reliance. It's one thing to say rely on God, but it's another thing to say humbly rely on God, which means I've admitted I can't do it, and I've admitted how bad I need God in my life, which is hard for a lot of us to do. The idea that somehow, someday, I can control and enjoy my drinking is the great obsession of every abnormal drinker. The persistence of this illusion is astonishing. What I really want is when I drank, I felt connected to God. I immediately relaxed. And Jung says this. It doesn't show up in the study guide till a lot later, but Bill Wilson and Carl Jung had this correspondence where essentially Bill Wilson is asking Carl Jung, did we tell the story right? Is that what you remember? The story of Roland Hazard spending time with Carl Jung and Carl Jung eventually saying to him, no, Roland, I have never seen an alcoholic with a mind like yours recover. I've never seen it in all my experience, and when Roland Hazard says, oh my God, no exceptions. And then Jung says, well, yeah, and he says there have been exceptions since early times. He's talking thousands of years. He's not talking when they've had some kind of spiritual experience that has changed the personality, changed a person's ambitions, whatever, but they go through a spiritual experience and they stop drinking. They're able to stop drinking. So Wilson's writing to Jung saying, was that the way you experienced it? And Jung writes back and says, yeah, that's pretty much it. And he adds the statement that in Jung's experience, that when an alcoholic drinks, he is seeking union with God. On some level, he says. He qualifies it a little bit, but that's an interesting thing, to realize that when I drink, what alcohol does for me is just astounding. It just takes away all the agony, all the pain, and I feel comfortable and not necessarily in control, but I'm really into this Jesuit stuff, and this guy Saint Ignatius, he sets out these two fundamental feeling states. One he calls consolation, and one he calls desolation. And then there are some variants of those, but they're essentially consolation is in sync with God. And I will know that I'm in sync with God, which really means I'm living God's will for me. I will know that I'm in sync with God when I have feelings of faith and hope and love. That's the way Ignatius said it. I feel faith and hope and love. And then he defines desolation as the precise opposite. I'm out of sync with God. And I will know I'm out of sync with God because I will have feelings of self-doubt instead of faith. I'll feel self-doubt or doubt. And instead of hope, which you also could say is enthusiasm, instead of feeling energy and good about life, I will feel despair. I will feel hopeless. I will feel like nothing's working out for me. And then finally, faith, hope, love. So uncertainty, despair, and fear. Fear that horrible things are happening and are going to happen. And I just find it a wonderful distinction, because if you can identify which state you're in, then you can proceed to treat that state with different mental exercises, which is what the spiritual exercises are all about. So I'm just trying to say that the persistence of this illusion is astonishing. I need relief, and I'm obsessed with moving from desolation to consolation. And I know alcohol will take me there, boom, like that. You know, it's not, there's no setup, there's no effort, there's no nothing. I can move from desolation to consolation, even just thinking about the first drink. I mean, it's a powerful thing. And can I take it or leave it? No, I cannot. You know, I have to take it, because I can't stand the desolation. I can't stand the self-doubt. I can't stand the feeling of hopelessness, lack of power. And I can't stand the fear and the effects of that. So anyway, I'm just trying to point out that the persistence of this illusion is astonishing. You know, one of the great themes of More About Alcoholism is self-knowledge is not going to get you anywhere. Anywhere. You know, you can absorb all this information theoretically, intellectually, but then when it comes to staying away from that first drink, not a chance. You know, the whole thing ends on page 43. Once more, the alcoholic at certain times has no effective mental defense against the first drink. Except in a few rare cases, neither he nor any other human being, you could substitute human power, nor any other human power can provide such a defense. His defense must come from a higher power. Now that means I gotta do something. I gotta humbly rely on this higher power, and then I gotta do what my higher power is telling me to do. And I have a vivid memory before I ever got to Alcoholics Anonymous of standing in front of my refrigerator at 7:30 in the morning, wanting to take the first drink of the day, because I couldn't stand the way I felt. And for whatever reason, because I'd been reading A Course in Miracles, which suggests the same thing, that, you know, it's going to take reliance on higher power if you want to live a different life. I asked God, do you want me to take this drink I want to take? And I hear God say, are you fricking kidding me? Of course I don't. That's the dumbest thing you could do. And then my ego says, watch this, God. And I open the refrigerator and I pull out this bottle and glug, glug, glug. You know, that's my inability to humbly rely on God and then behave. I feel like I've been in a battle my whole life between my human ego personality and what it wants and what it's afraid of and what it thinks it needs, and its quest for a happy, satisfying life. You know, we're a ways off, but at the end of this story, Fred says something that is my experience and that I cherish as much as anything. I have since been brought into a way of life infinitely more satisfying and I hope, more useful than the life I lived before, which was by no means a bad one. My life has been a beautiful life, except I felt miserable for most of it. And the only way I could overcome the misery was with drinking. And that's why I drank for so long. I'm a control freak enough that my life never broke down the way it happens for some of us. So any rate, so I better get back to page 30 here. We're never going to get anywhere. All right, so second paragraph on page 30, we learned that we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholics. This is the first step in recovery. The delusion that we are like other people or presently may be has to be smashed. That's a strong word, don't you think? Has to be smashed? Now the question is, how am I going to fully concede to my innermost self if I don't even understand the term? It says that we were real, well, I didn't say real, but that we're real alcoholics. There's no doubt about it. Well, that's why in this presentation of the steps, we spent a good bit of time on the introduction, page 20. It's the last page of the introduction of the study guide. And it's a 3-column grid of the 3 different aspects of our disease: the physical aspect, the mental aspect, the spiritual aspect. And it's trying to get us to organize the information so that we understand the how I know I've got the physical attribute of aspect of the disease. What's the symptom by which I know I've got that aspect? And then it moves into the mental part. What is the symptom by which I know that I've got that? And then it moves to the spiritual part. How do I know I've got that? Well, I think this is critical. And what winds up happening is that a lot of people have the mental aspect, and a lot of people have the spiritual aspect. Most of the world is agnostic. Most of the world doesn't have a relationship with God. And most of the world does some sort of insane behavior that they might not cop to an obsession, but they would state that their mind focuses on something and they keep doing something behaviorally that isn't really doing them any good. I mean, our biggest ones in the alcoholic world, it's alcohol, tobacco, sex, and for many of us, ice cream. I tried to have 1 tablespoon of ice cream last night, and I didn't go to the whole quart, but I couldn't stop at 1. There was something about that cold sugar hitting the brain, it was wow. But what I'm trying to say is most of the world is agnostic. Most of the world has the last story, Fred, he's going to use strange mental blank spot because he's saying, my life is good. I got a family, a home, a job, it's good. But I've got this strange mental blank spot around alcohol. That's my story, good life. But when it came to drinking, I was insane, literally insane. This book, this chapter is going to use the desperate experiment of the first drink. Think about that. How often did I try the desperate experiment of the first drink? My mind's telling me I need a drink. That'll make things better. How many times did I do that? And I keep winding up in the outhouse or whatever. Keeps going downhill. I was talking with Glenn and Sandy earlier, what about the desperate experiment of the first prayer? Have you gotten there yet? Where you try to pray because you just don't know what else to do. You're lost. Desperate experiment of the first prayer. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is if I'm going to concede to myself that I'm an alcoholic, I got to understand what the definition is. The definition, the physical aspect is that I am an abnormal, unsafe drinker. My body will not tell me to stop the way normal drinkers do. What's the treatment? Abstinence. That's all we got. What are the promises? No hangovers, no handcuffs, no, the stuff that happens to us physically when we drink. Mental part, strange mental blank spot for me. How do I know I've got it? Well, this is interesting because what the book says is there is a complete failure of the type of defense that keeps us from putting our hand on a hot stove. The failure of the hot stove defense is what tells you that you've got a strange mental blank spot around alcohol. I keep trying it. Nothing stops me. And then once I take that first drink, boom, it's gone. What's the treatment of the mental part? Well, it's steps 4 through 9. If we're trying to establish a relationship with God, the first thing we got to do is clean up our mind or get free of our mind's mental habit patterns over which we are powerless. I can't humbly rely on God when, the two things in the way of that relationship are, one is my sense of pride, my sense that I don't need God. I'm turning to my self-reliance. This America is built on self-reliance. I'm going to be a good American. I don't need anybody or anything. All I need is my self-reliance. And so the first thing is I gotta be willing to say, well, my self-reliance hasn't worked. My self-reliance has not brought me its promises. My mind promises me that I'm going to feel better or I'm going to feel good when this, and this happen. And every time I've gotten to there, I've made that happen. I'm happy for 5 minutes before my mind is right in there. Well, now that's good. You did good, but now this person needs to be different and that situation needs to be different and you need this. Then I get there and I'm happy for 5 minutes before it comes up with the next thing. So there's no way I'm going to develop a relation. There's no way I'm going to be able to humbly rely on God until I've lost my pride that I can do this thing. I can live this life based on my self-reliance. I've got to do that first. And the second thing is I've got to get my mind opened up. Silkworth says, and though perhaps you came to scoff, you will remain to pray. That's a very few words says a huge thing. That if I'm going to learn to pray, I've got to overcome my contempt prior to investigation. I've got to overcome my sense that I know what to do, or I know how to look at the situation and judge it as the truth. Course in Miracles has this wonderful line about you still think that your judgment is a powerful, your understanding is a powerful contribution to the truth and makes it what it is. Yeah, you still think that by understanding something, you're contributing to the truth, that you have the ability to understand the truth. But for me, it immediately comes to the truth that as much as I want to and need to, I cannot trust my own thinking. That's a hell of a place to be when you've built your life on your own thinking. And then all of a sudden, this thing's coming along saying, well, don't believe everything you think. Because your thinking has seriously misled you. Your thinking sponsored your drinking. To go back to that first paragraph, my sponsor taught me to substitute thinking for drinking. Let's see. No person likes to think he is bodily and mentally different. I want to think that I think normally. It's not surprising that our thinking careers have been characterized by countless vain attempts to prove we could think like other people. I'm trying to prove I got a good thinker. Okay, I'm not getting very far, and I gotta get going here. So, mental aspect of the disease, failure of the hot stove defense. Well, how do I put the hot stove defense back into play, which is what step 10 promises. Step 10 promises that if we're presented with alcohol, we will recoil from it as if from a hot flame. Ain't that something? And all of a sudden, the hot stove defense is back in play. And we recognize that we did not do that. We did not accomplish that. So how do we treat the mental aspect? We go through 4 through 9. We tediously examine the habit patterns of our own mind, our powerlessness over our willingness and ability to resent, to dwell on our fear, and to sink into remorse around our selfish conduct, whether it's sexual or financial or emotional. It's not about sex. It's about our behavior with other human beings and our selfishness. Our self will run riot. That, of course, we don't think so. Okay, so the treatment for the mental part is steps 4 through 9, and the result of that treatment is what we call conscious contact. And the promises are saying that we get that conscious contact halfway through the amends process, which frankly, most people inside Alcoholics Anonymous never get to. They never get to amends, they never get to conscious contact. And those are the people that after 10 or 20 years sober, kill themselves or go out. It's really something when you've been around here for a while and you've watched people come and go and you're asking yourself, what happened? I'm going to claim that if you get conscious contact and you keep doing what you're doing, which is what step 10 tells you to do, you will stay. You don't want to go anywhere. This has been the greatest experience of my life, the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, without question. And I can tell you about some really wonderful experiences that I've had. This is the best, far and away, head and shoulders. And the promises of treating the mental aspect, steps 4 through 9, are all the promises in the steps. They're all in there. Maybe 6 and 7 don't have much, although they do promise, if I will pray for willingness, I will get it. Lots of promises in there. That finally brings, so we've moved, the goal of the physical aspect is sobriety. The goal of the mental aspect is sanity. And the goal of the spiritual aspect is serenity. So important to say to newcomers from the beginning, this is not about getting sober. You got to get sober if you're going to get sane. In fact, your lack of sobriety is the indicator of your insanity, right? The most insane thing we do sober. We decide to try the desperate experiment of the first drink, sober. So sobriety does not equate to sanity, is what I'm trying to say, but it's a necessary component. And sanity is not the end either. If you want serenity, we have to go through our own spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius, which are steps 4 through 9. So finally, the spiritual thing, which is everybody's problem, we're coming up on we agnostics. So how do I know I have a spiritual malady? How do I know I don't have a relationship with God? And my answer for that is fear. When I experience human fear, I do not believe my soul experiences fear. I believe my body and mind experience fear. They experience fear because I'm a living being. I'm easily threatened. I mean, for the real, if I don't get enough food, sleep, shelter, stay out of the way of speeding cars, don't drink poison, whatever, I can stay alive. So fear is a necessary component of of staying alive, not to be disregarded. One of the things I love that Jesus said is, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and render unto God that which is God's. Well, what that means to me is that if I'm living a human life, I got to live a human life on human terms, which means I have to pay attention to my fear if it's threatening my livingness. I have to try to solve that problem. It's not like we wander around not worrying about getting hit by cars or shot by some deranged person. But when my mind gets a hold of fear, and then it starts predicting and projecting and doing all that stuff, that's another matter. And the reason I'm saying to you that fear is my symptom of the spiritual malady is because I have that empty, dark feeling of all I've got is my thinking. My thinking is going to get me out of this. Whether it's self-knowledge is going to keep me sober, which this chapter keeps saying over and over again, nuh-uh, not going to do it. And the book also says the reason I fear is because of my awareness that my self-reliance fails me. The exact nature of my wrongs is I believe my own thinking, and my own thinking fails me time and again. So how am I going to overcome my fear? Humbly relying on God, behaving the way I think God wants me to behave. The essence of steps 10, 11, and 12 on a constant basis, all the time. And then we get to the 10th step promises and the 11th step promises and the 12th step promises, which are, in my mind, are far and away more wonderful than all the promises that come before. Okay. I'm still on page 30. Had to fully concede to our innermost selves we were alcoholics. The delusion that we can think and act like other people has to be smashed. We've lost our ability to control our drinking. No real alcoholic ever recovers control. That what they're saying is we never overcome the physical allergy. We may overcome the attraction of the first drink, but if we take the first drink, we're not going to change the allergy. We're going to experience the phenomenon of craving. That's built into our physical system. All of us felt that at times we were regaining control, but such intervals, usually brief, inevitably followed by still less control, led in time to pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. We are convinced to a person that alcoholics of our type are in the grip of a progressive illness over any considerable period. We get worse, never better. This is a cold, hard truth that they present to us over and over again in this book. I'm actually turning the page to page 31. We've tried every imaginable remedy. In some instances, brief recovery. But they're saying how do we say it? You can't turn a pickle back into a cucumber. That's a one-way street. And then they run through all these different methods that they try. And I just want to point out at the bottom of 31, one that can come, I just want to point it out. You can quickly diagnose yourself. Step over to the nearest bar room and try some controlled drinking. And that's where people will come to the conclusion that if I try to control it, I can't enjoy it. If I try to enjoy it, I can't control it. Try to drink and stop abruptly. Try it more than once. It may not take long for you to decide. If you're honest, it may be worth a bad case of jitters to get a full knowledge of your condition. If you're working with somebody and they're expressing doubt about being alcoholic, this book is telling, well, go try it. Go try some control. See whether you got this phenomenon of craving or not. And then they enter into this first story, man of 30, and doing all this spree drinking. But notice in that paragraph that starts with a man of 30, but saw that he would get nowhere if he drank at all. It's just like Bill says. Bill says, I saw that I could not take so much as even one drink. He sees the allergy. I never did. I never saw it. For 50 years, I never saw it. It took you people to point it out for me to even recognize it. This guy sees it. So at this moment, he's a hard drinker. He's got the allergy, but he's able to summon up enough mental energy to not drink. And then look at this. He fell victim to a belief which practically every alcoholic has, that his long period of sobriety and self-discipline qualified him to drink as other men. He's saying that sobriety is going to remove the allergy. Now that means he doesn't really understand the allergy. And then the effort that this guy goes to try to stop, puzzled and humiliated. Several trips to the hospital, gathering all his strength. He attempted to stop altogether and found that he could not. He's dead inside of 4 years. I mean, it's a horrible story. Is that going to stop us? This case contains a powerful lesson. I'm over to page 33. Most of us have believed if we stayed sober, we could drink normally. But here's a guy, and he found he was where he left off at 30. We've seen this truth demonstrated again and again. I love this. If you are planning to stop drinking, there must be no reservation nor any lurking notion. There's a group out there called the Lurking Notions Group, and I always love the name. And just think about it. You got any lurking notions creeping around there inside your brain? How you can do something? Someday you will be immune to alcohol. And then you heard of Young People's AA. This is where the definition comes from, that several of our crowd, men of 30 or less, those are young people. And then it talks about that it's not a matter of quantity, and this is particularly true of women. Okay, let's see. Turning over to page 34, and they're going to say again, this is not the bar room, but at the top of 34, if anyone questions whether he has entered this dangerous area, let him try leaving liquor alone for 1 year. Can you imagine? I mean, are you kidding me? In the end of the paragraph, some will be drunk the day after making their resolution, most of them within a few weeks. We simply, the pull of the relief that alcohol brings to us is beyond belief. The paragraph that starts, for those who are unable to drink moderately, question is how to stop altogether. we're assuming that the reader desires to stop. This is a big deal. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. And the hardest thing with newcomers is they may or may not have that desire. Not that we are to accommodate them and be as helpful as we can be, but nothing really happens, I don't believe, inside AA until you honestly want to desire to stop drinking. And what brings that about, I don't know. But look at what they say. Whether such a person can quit on a non-spiritual basis depends on the extent to which he has already lost the power to choose. People talk about drug of choice. What is your drug of choice? So they will say, my drug of choice was, I heard another guy say, no. We're talking about your drug of no choice, right? We're talking about the one you can't stay away from. You may think you're choosing. We're telling you, you ain't choosing at all. Your whole being is choosing for you because it needs that relief. You don't have a choice. What I have a choice about is whether I'm going to go to self-reliance to try to keep me away from that first drink, or whether I'm going to go to God. I've told you lots about my long period of what I now see as desolation, a long, dry period where every time I prayed, I felt like a fraud. But the thing that was so amazing to me was I never seriously thought about drinking. I knew somewhere deep down that my higher power didn't want me to drink. And it was never a concern for me. I did think about ending my life because I just couldn't handle the ugliness, the agony of it. Anyway, okay. So, we're running out of time here. So the hard drinker can stop on a non-spiritual basis. You give the hard drinker a good enough reason, and he can stop, not take the first drink. Many of us felt we had plenty of character. There was a tremendous urge to cease forever, yet we found it impossible. This is the baffling feature of alcoholism as we know it, this utter inability to leave it alone, no matter how great the necessity or the wish. How then shall we help our readers determine to their own satisfaction whether or not they're one of us? And this will take you back to those 3 columns in that introduction and trying to understand the physical, mental, and spiritual nature of the disease. Okay, so I think I'm going to stop there and but just point out on the top of 35. So what they're going to do now, so they've talked about this guy that stopped for 25 years and retires, and out comes the bottle and he's dead in 4 years. So what we're coming up on are 3 different stories: Jim the car salesman, the jaywalker, and Fred the accountant. And what they're really trying to do is give us information on the obsession and this desperate experiment of the first drink and everything like that. So I'm just going to read this last paragraph on 35. What sort of thinking dominates? That means obsession, obsesses, an alcoholic who repeats time after time. Oh, I got somebody unmuted. Let me see if I can figure out who it is. Oh, there you are. Okay. There. What sort of thinking dominates or obsesses an alcoholic who repeats time after time the desperate experiment of the first drink? And I mentioned that earlier. It's something to think about. And then also conversely to think about the desperate experiment of the first prayer and how that worked out. All right, thank you very much. We'll pick up there on page 35 next week, and I really appreciate your being here, and I'm gonna gong this gong and then stop the recording, and we'll have some open discussion. So thank you very much for your attention.